Good afternoon. My name is Corley Dennis, and I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communications, and we're so glad that you all are able to attend our panel discussion this afternoon entitled Open Government from Routine Business to National Emergencies. And it certainly is a timely topic, and we have an excellent panel for you. But before we get started, I would like to ask Dr. Kopp to come forward and say a few words of welcome. Dr. Kopp.
Thank you, Corley. Welcome, everybody. Today we have an opportunity to hear from four distinguished panelists, and with Ed Dawson moderating, I'm sure he's going to bring out the best in our panelists on the topic that Corley Dennison mentioned to you, but it's deeper than just open government. It's really transparency, and transparency in the post-9/11 era. And I encourage all in attendance to consider questions that you can pose to the panelists. I've had the privilege of doing this for the last hour. I can assure you that they can answer some questions. Others they will claim as national security interests and not answer those. Don't let them get away with that. But I think you're in for a very interesting conversation about transparency in government, and especially when we get to national security issues, homeland security, the sorts of information that should be or should not be generally available to the average American. And one of the interesting questions that we were discussing was, who gets to make that decision? So with that brief introduction, I welcome you to this panel discussion to celebrate Constitution Week. Enjoy and think of good questions to ask our panelists. Thank you.
As Dr. Kopp mentioned, this is part of our celebration of Constitution Week. Many of you may have seen the presentation by Judge Martin yesterday afternoon, which was an excellent presentation about the fight for 15th Amendment rights in the state of Mississippi. But we are continuing our Constitution Week celebration with our panel on open government, which is sponsored by the Drinko Academy, and we thank the Drinko Academy and Dr. Alan Gould for their funding of this particular celebration. This panel is also supported by the West Virginia Open Government Coalition. The West Virginia Open Government Coalition is a nonprofit organization that seeks transparency in state government. We do have the president of the West Virginia Open Government Coalition, Leslie Messina, with us this afternoon. So this is a very timely topic given the age that we live in, and I would like to introduce our moderator this afternoon, who is Ed Dawson, who is the publisher and editor of the Huntington Herald-Dispatch. Ed has been a great friend and supporter of the journalism program here at Marshall, and we're glad that he agreed to moderate today. So I introduce to you Ed Dawson.
Thank you very much, and we're so glad that y'all could be here today as part of Constitution Week. When we're talking about open government, there are a lot of different issues to think about. Not only what should be considered public information, what information the government's collect and gather that should be available to people and to what people, but also how that should be disseminated, how readily it can be made available, but also at what cost can it be made available. So we've got people who are going to talk about all of these aspects, as the title said, from routine government things to national security type issues. So I'm going to introduce the panel here quickly. Right here on the left is David Herzog, who's a journalism professor at the University of Missouri, and he led a team there to launch in the spring of this year the Open Missouri website, which provides online access to a pretty wide range of government information about the state of Missouri, and he's going to show you a little bit of what he's done. He also teaches computer-assisted reporting, and David was a reporter for the Providence Journal, the Baltimore Sun, the Allentown, Pennsylvania Morning Call, and he's a graduate of Temple University in Philadelphia. I'll go along this way. Ted Boettner is who's next to him is the executive director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, which is a nonpartisan research group in Charleston, West Virginia. And in recent years, his group has done a number of reports on state government and and different aspects of budget and policy, some of which have generated quite a bit of news content. I think we've written a number of stories about different studies that they have done. And he also produces an annual State of Working West Virginia, which is a great resource for journalists and the public as well. And Ted's a graduate of WVU and has a master's from the University of New Hampshire. Next to Ted is Joe Thornton, who is the Secretary of the West Virginia Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety. He previously served in a number of different public information roles in state government, so he has a lot of experience with what can be disseminated and how it gets out and that sort of thing. He also has experience in the military. He was in the Armed Services Air Force for 10 years, and Joe is both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree graduate of Marshall University School of Journalism. So we'll go herd here for Joe here. And next to him is Tom Kirk, who is the director of the Intelligence Fusion Center, and he's going to tell us what that is. But as part of Homeland Security in West Virginia, he's a general legal counsel for military affairs and public safety in West Virginia. He has more than 24 years of law enforcement experience and court experience, including being superintendent of the West Virginia State Police. Tom's a graduate of West Virginia University College of Law, the FBI Executive Institute, and as well as a number of other postgraduate programs that I didn't have time to mention. What we're going to do is first start out with a kind of an opening comment from each of our panelists, because they all represent very differing areas, and give you a chance to get some ideas about this, and then hopefully after they've all had a little bit of time to talk, we'll get some questions from you and get this conversation going. So first, David's going to tell us a little bit about Open Missouri.
As Ed mentioned, I teach computer-assisted reporting at the University of Missouri and have a background in investigative reporting. And one of the things that really struck me over the years in practicing investigative reporting and also teaching undergrads and graduate students how to go about and get data for their own stories is that figuring out how to do that is pretty tough. Because there's no centralized place that you can go, at least in Missouri state government, and find information about the databases that are available. I was a fellow at the Reynolds Journalism Institute last year, and that is an institute that is part of the University of Missouri. And we focus on doing innovative projects in journalism. And what I wanted to take a look at was building a platform for people so you could share information about data. You can even make requests for data that government agencies are holding offline. And so when I was going into this and when I was starting to write a proposal for this, I was thinking about my goals for Open Missouri. What do I want to accomplish with this project? And so a few things that I wanted to accomplish. One was to inform Missourians about public data that's held by government agencies. Because in Missouri, public agencies aren't doing a great job at proactively disclosing all the information that they gather and they keep. And like all states, Missouri is putting some data up on their websites. And some agencies are really great at doing this. Other agencies, not so great. And there's no way to tell, what the universe of data was. Even though the Department of Natural Resources might have all this data on its website, we don't know what the department is keeping offline. So what I wanted to do was to answer the question about what do the departments have offline. Also, we wanted to inspire journalists, citizens, web developers, entrepreneurs, businesses, nonprofits about using public data. Because even though I have a journalism background and this is a project that's coming out of a journalism school, there's a very big group of people who are interested in open access to information. Could be your local PTA president who wants to get information about local teacher pay. Or it could be somebody who's a neighborhood activist who wants to get information about city recycling information. So there are a lot of people out there to whom getting this information is important. So we wanted to build this as a platform to let them know about it and also inspire them to use this information. Also, we wanted to serve as a platform to connect people who are using data from state and local government agencies, so that people who register and use the site, they can share information with each other. And then also, we want to educate Missourians about how they can access and use this public data. So in terms of the project, we haven't quite gotten to point 4, but that's the road ahead. But we've gotten pretty much through the first 3 goals. So in putting this together, there are really 2 backstories that are important. One is the burgeoning US government transparency movement. On the first day in office, President Obama said something like, "I am going to make this the most transparent administration ever," and released a memo on government transparency. Those of us who followed that, know that they really haven't delivered very well on that. But there was a promise at the outset to make more information available to citizens. And one of the things that was important about this was that, even though the federal government really hasn't followed up that well on it, it really seeded a lot of efforts in state governments and local governments. So there's this burgeoning Government 2.0 or open data movement where there are people who are working inside and outside of government agencies who are trying to make data more available to people, and web developers, journalists, and ordinary citizens. And then another important thread is the culture of sharing that we all know about on the internet. So we wanted to kind of tie these 2 things in, the government transparency and the sharing that's occurring. So just looking at a little transparency history, how many of you have been to this website that's called data.gov? Okay. All right, so a few of you have. It's if you go there, you can go there and take a look and see what's there. It's been up about 2 years, and the intent was to create a portal that leads you to government data. The government also promised to release a lot of data on the site. However, big criticism has been that this is just another layer that you need to go through to get information, that they really haven't released a lot of new information. So there was a lot of promise in this, but it really hasn't delivered on the promises. Here in Missouri, we have something that's called the Missouri Accountability Portal. And this is common in a lot of states. A lot of states set this up and put kind of basic accountability data up. And that includes things like expenditures by the state, stimulus spending, employee salaries, and also tax credit data. Tax credits are a very hot issue in Missouri, and there's a lot of interest. So they were included in the official government version of the website. And then on the state homepage for a while, they had a Discover State Data widget where you could drill down and get different data sets from state government agencies. And like everything else, data has actually gone social. I never thought that I would be saying these words, but people want to get data. They want to tell other people that they got data. They want to share that information. So there are different commercial platforms that have been developed to share data. One of them is Open Data by Socrata, which is based in Seattle. And they're actually providing hosting services to states of Washington, Oregon, City of Chicago. So they're gaining some traction and actually have a sustainable business model. Then there's another company called InfoChimps that's based in Austin, Texas, and they're also trying to create a social data platform where people can share data that they get, and then they also charge for enhanced services. There's a company called GeoCommons that allows you to take geographic data that's used in government geographic information systems and you can share it and create your own maps online with this service. And so, going in with those thoughts, the big question we had is how do we use simple, freely available technology to connect people with state and local government data? And so what we did was we launched during Sunshine Week, which was we launched this on March the 11th, March 17th of 2011, the openmissouri.org website. And this is a place where people can go to find out what data state government agencies are collecting in Missouri, keeping offline and not telling you about. So there's a whole lot of data that they're telling you about, but we wanted to enhance transparency by focusing on what they're not currently telling you about. And so far, we have more than 230 data sets that are listed in the catalog. We have 19 top-level state departments listed, along with contact information. User community, we have 50 registered users at this point. We're doing a more formal hard launch of the site in the next couple of weeks that we've added features, so we expect this figure is going to go up. And so some of the big features on the site, one is the Sunshine Request Generator. In Missouri, the law that we use to gather information from state agencies is the Missouri Sunshine Law. So what we've done is we've built into the system the ability for you to just click a button that says sunshine this for a particular data set, and it takes your user information, the agency information, the information about the data set, and puts that all into one letter that you can copy and paste and put into your email program or your Word program. We also allow users to suggest a data set. So if you know about a database that's out there and you want to tell us about that, you can do that. You can also attach a copy of that data set and share that with the public. You can comment on data sets, so you can have discussions around the data sets. And we also have social media sharing tools built in, so if you find a data set on here, you can share that with your network. So in terms of we gathered standard information about the databases, or at least we attempted to. Not all agencies gave us all this information. So we asked for the name of the database, description, the format in which the data is stored, so Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, text file, that kind of information. The time span covered by the data, how frequently the agency updates the information, and also the cost. For each agency, we have the description of the agency, we have the mailing address, the level of government, the entity name, the director of the agency, and also a link to its website. And then so we have details about how you fill the Sunshine request. So we have the contact name. So this is a pretty unique resource in that the state of Missouri does not give you one-stop shopping for Sunshine information contacts. But this website provides that. So we have the contact name, title of the contact, their phone number, whether they accept email requests. Believe it or not, some agencies in Missouri don't accept email requests. 30 years after email, no email request. And so to find information in Open Missouri, we build in search. We're using Google search kind of as the back end for the search and pulling it back in. You can browse giant list of data sets. You can look by the agency. You can look by the category. So search looks like this. You just punch in kennel into the search box, and then it tells you that the Department of Agriculture collects information about kennels. So this would have been a big deal last year because there was a voter proposition about regulating puppy mills in Missouri. So you can browse the data set just as a list, or you can look at it by category, such as everything that's been tagged for environmental protection, or by agency. So we've tried to make this as easy as possible for the average person to come to the site and look information up. And also we tried to build it so there are a lot of keywords in here that come up when people do searches on Google, and they'll end up at our site. So we build it with search engine optimization in mind. And so if you want to join, for people who want to join the Open Missouri community, you can do more. You can generate those Sunshine request letters. You can suggest the data. So the Sunshine letter looks like this. Right now we're looking at the egg licenses database. So the Department of Agriculture, yes, believe it or not, has a database of everybody who has a license to sell eggs in Missouri. So if you're doing a story maybe about like salmonella in eggs, if there's like an outbreak of a disease in eggs, you can get a hold of this, find all the egg license dealers, and contact them. So it's a good piece of contact information. Then you just click on the Sunshine This button, then it generates that letter for you right there, which anything that saves typing, I like things that save typing. So this saves typing and puts it in language that the agencies will tend to respond to. So you can also suggest a data set and upload that information to us. We review all the information that gets uploaded first, so it's not like anybody can just post anything and say, I got this data, when it's really not that data. So we do have a level of editorial control. So moving ahead with this, what we're going to do is we're going to make the software that's behind Open Missouri open source. So groups in other states could use our software and build their own catalog. We're also considering what's called like a software as a service model, where you could pay a certain amount of money to have us host the software and give you the service, kind of like Google does, like with email. That's the software as a service, or there are other examples too. And we're also exploring nonprofit funding to grow the site.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Well, thank you. That's interesting, and look at something that's a very innovative way to look at public information in another state. I thought we'd kind of go to the other end of the spectrum a little bit and talk about some of the information that maybe is a little more difficult or to make available, and how that sort of control goes. And I was going to ask Tom Kirk to maybe tell us a little bit about the department that he is working with in Homeland Security, and some of the issues that maybe have come up with information in the last time since that he's been doing that, but especially since 9/11. So Tom,
here.
I think that, is this a microphone?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
very good. I just sit here, always yell. I am the director of the West Virginia Intelligence Fusion Center. My name is Tom Kirk, but as most of my panelists called me here at lunch today, you just call me Big Brother anytime that you like to. I'm never really sure how to start off in panel discussions like this. Until last night, we actually had a chance to have a very nice dinner last night, and Mr. Morris introduced all of us as panel members. He introduced me and said what my name was and where I worked, and when he got done introducing the rest of the panel members, very nice young lady, I see her sitting out there in the audience, was sitting next to me. She said, Mr. Kirk, I have a question for you. And I immediately went like this, and for those of you that don't know sign language, this is universal for, if you give me just a minute, I'll make a total ass out of myself. So that's what I did. And I said, I know what you're going to say. What is a fusion center? So I spent about the next 20 minutes explaining to her what a fusion center was, and when I finished, I said, I know I've kind of bounced around a lot. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not. Did I? And she said, well, actually, you didn't. I was going to ask you where the restrooms are. So when I explained that to her, I thought probably the very first thing I need to do today is to tell you what a fusion center is. I hardly ever write down and read I don't normally have prepared speeches, but I thought what I would do, just so I don't miss anything, and if you bear with me, and I apologize for reading this, but I thought I'd read this and maybe give a little better idea of what a fusion center is. Fusion centers are owned and operated locally by either state or, in some cases, major cities. Presently, there are a total of 72 fusion centers throughout the United States and her territories. Every state has at least one fusion center. In the investigation into the tragic events of 9/11, the public demanded that 3 major questions be answered. Those questions were: what happened, how did it happen, and how do we either prevent it or reduce the risk of this type of attack on our homeland from ever happening again. It was discovered that there were considerable amounts of information about the attackers and their plans years before the attack. It was also discovered that many different agencies had assorted amounts of information, but that no one agency had all of the information. It was also determined that the bulk of this information was collected by or given to local or state agencies. Lastly, it was found that those federal agencies that had information and or the proper personnel and equipment to vet, analyze, and act upon the information purposefully withheld that information from other federal agencies as well as local authorities. The results of this incompetence, arrogance, and malfeasance was 9/11. In order to properly and legally collect, vet, and share this type of intelligence, collection of information had to be done more thoroughly and intelligently. The information had to be vetted and then analyzed as quickly as possible, and the resulting intelligence had to be disseminated to those who could properly act upon the intelligence while still protecting the public's rights. Because almost all information begins at and is collected locally through human intelligence, then it made sense that there needed to be a local collection and vetting point. As it is said, Homeland Security begins with hometown security. Thus, the formation of intelligence fusion centers began. As fusion centers matured, it was found that the vast majority of information coming into the centers was not about terroristic activities, but a variety of other crimes and hazards. The fusion center was a ready-made analytical vetting tool to receive, analyze, and properly distribute intelligence that could harm the citizens or property of each state. Like the internet, fusion centers became linked together to traverse boundaries that before added elusiveness to criminal activity. Where states that have more than one fusion center, governors designate one fusion center to be the primary fusion center. On March 17th of 2008, the West Virginia Intelligence Fusion Center was established in its present form. West Virginia only has one fusion center, but we are in the process of creating some satellite offices to better serve the people of the state. In summary, the West Virginia Intelligence Fusion Center is a hub whereby various agencies and private partners can collaborate to bring together their subject matter experts, their specialized equipment, and various authorities in order to prevent or lessen the possibilities of another 9/11, and in the process to fight the ever-growing problem of drugs and crime in this state and in the nation. So that's kind of a quick dissertation of what a fusion center is. Again, we're only 3.5 years old. We are a state organization. We operate under Cabinet Secretary Thornton under the Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety. We deal in information, and I am assuming both on the panel and out here there will be questions on how that's collected, how it's maintained, exactly what we can and cannot do with that. So I'll reserve any other comment until the questions come forward. I do have to warn you that the answers to the very first 3 questions are, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. That information is classified, and we can neither admit or deny that. So the first 3 questions are already answered. After that, it's open season.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask Ted to tell us a little bit about what's going on in West Virginia. He's has some interests that are sort of parallel to David's in sort of bringing a third-party look at government information, and he can tell us a little bit about what's going on here and especially some of the budget work you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, I'll shift gears a little bit. Our focus is mainly looking at how the state and local governments spend money in West Virginia. So in terms of transparency and accountability, we're looking at how they spend the money, and we want to make sure that they're spending taxpayer money in a good and efficient way, and that everybody in this room, including public officials, have access to that information and can understand how effective certain programs are. Over the years, we've put out reports. One that we worked with, sorry to say, West Virginia University on a report that students did. This is sort of a summary of it on transparency and accountability in the state budget. We also did a very provocative report a couple of years ago called Money for Nothing, Do Business Subsidies Create Jobs or Leave Workers in Dire Straits? It's a little too provocative, actually, when we did that title, but had a nice ring since it was a song from, forget that band now. but anyway, most of our work is how do we make the legislative process more transparent? How do people in this room understand that process and have an understanding of how much the state is spending? One of the things that we feel that needs to really happen, I only have a couple minutes to go through a couple of them, but I think this represents a good place to start. Currently, in West Virginia's budget process is almost exclusively executive-driven. While the legislature can make changes to the budget during the 60-day period, usually at the end, it's sort of a closed-door process, and that's fine. That's how it is in most states. But the governor then, after the legislature passes the budget, the governor can veto line items within the budget, and there's no recourse. There's no way for the legislature really to come back and override that veto because the session's over. And by the time the budget gets enacted, it'll be the end of the first day of July. So there's no, unless the governor calls a special session and puts on the agenda that the legislature can veto the budget, it really isn't going to come up there. So I think we really need to, we could remedy that problem by having a regular budget session in the summer or at the beginning of the regular session. There are some ways where the state can do it, but it's just really difficult for the state to really have a check on that executive power. And that's pretty unique to West Virginia. Also, currently we don't have a final budget. So after the state legislature and the governor, vetoes line items in the budget, and they work out but there's no final document to tell us exactly what is the final budget after all of the vetoes, and there's nothing online to put that together. So if you have to ask a simple question, what passed, what is our budget for this year down to the mark, you're not going to find it online currently. You're not going to find the final budget. You might actually now. So that's one thing, the state could publish a final budget. And one of the big issues that we've been working on for a long time is fiscal notes. I'm not sure if anybody knows what a fiscal note is, but a fiscal note is a price tag that's put on each legislation. Of the 2,000 bills that are introduced each session, about 16% have a fiscal note. This tells you exactly what the fiscal impact of a piece of legislation is. And one of the problems that we found, and that is remedied in almost 40 other states, is that the fiscal note is usually prepared by an independent agency, usually a legislative budget office. Sometimes they're called a legislative fiscal office. We are one of 9 states that do not have one. So the agencies are preparing the fiscal notes. These other states, the agencies help prepare them, but they work with an independent office to make sure that they're not lowballing or highballing the fiscal. And this is, ask any state legislature, ask them if this has ever happened. They'll definitely tell you that they see it all the time. So that's something the state could do, is create a legislative fiscal office to ensure that the fiscal notes are independent and objective, and that they're reported online. And at the end of the session, we have an aggregate amount. This is how much all the legislation costs this year. We have no idea right now. And when they add a committee substitute to a bill, so they've been working a bill through committee, and now it's different than it was before when they put the original fiscal note on. Well, they don't go back and change it. And it's very difficult in West Virginia because we have a 60-day session. So it's not blaming anything. We just really need to make sure we go back and tally what that actual note is and have an idea what the fiscal impact is to the state. And there are many other things the Legislative Fiscal Office, which would operate sort of like a congressional budget office does at the federal level, doing research analysis, independent. We all sort of trust what the CBO says usually. Somebody doesn't sort of have a dog in the hunt, so to speak. So that would definitely be one thing that the state could do. I could just give you one prime example. That we had a special session this July, and a fiscal note was put on a bill to redistribute severance tax, the coal severance tax, Right now, about 7% of the coal severance tax collections go to counties, mostly to the counties that produce the coal. And they're going to increase that to 12%, and that's great. I mean, I'm not making a judgment there, but they said it had no fiscal impact. If you read the bill, because it's all revenue, it's equal. Well, yeah, it does. It has about a $20 million fiscal impact on the state general revenue fund. Over a couple of years, the general revenue fund won't have $20 million. You took money sort of from Peter to pay Paul, and that's legislation, but we need to know as citizens that you did that. So when you have to cut programs next year because you don't have $20 million, we know where that happened. You made a decision, and it needs to be transparent online. So that would be a huge step in the right direction, to join the other states that have done that and to have independent analysis of that. That would also help us have access to more information. Another thing that we look at a lot too is also the ability to disclose company-specific data and job creation outcomes on business subsidies. We see that in the paper all the time. The Macy's deal up in the Eastern Panhandle. Does the state do we have access to what that deal was worth at the county level? How much in state tax credits are they going to get? How many jobs are going to be created? What about the state tax credits that were given last year? Do we know how many jobs were created? What kind of jobs? What are they paying? Do they live in West Virginia or do they live in Winchester? Are we using our state money to subsidize other jobs for people that don't live in our state? We don't know. We need to know that. And we need to know exactly who's receiving those funds. The state of Illinois, which is kind of ironic that they do a really good job on this, and they have a Illinois corporate accountability website that lists private companies, how they benefit from public subsidies and tax credits. So this all can be done. You just have to put it out in the open. And when we have that information, we make a lot better decisions as the public and the legislature when they pass the budget every year, because that's your money. So having access to information is really important. One thing, lastly, that's problematic is our state tax expenditures. Is anybody familiar with what a tax expenditure is? So if I give you like the homestead exemption, if you're over 65, you get a reduced amount payment on your property taxes. So you get treated differently than I do when I buy my house. And that's fine because seniors live on limited income, but it also takes away money from the general revenue fund where we'd have to pay more. And the state puts out tax expenditure document once a year, and it's on the state tax department's website under other documents, and it's hard to find. But they only put out once a year for certain tax credits and expenditures. So having that all together, and some states have actually taken, which I think is a really good course of action, every year the legislature appropriates all the tax expenditures, because even though they're an indirect form of spending, they're pretty much the same as spending money. You're giving a tax treatment to somebody for one particular reason. It doesn't matter if it's bad or good, but you're doing that. I could go on with different examples too of how that happened with the Marcellus ethane cracker bill last year too. That had a zero fiscal note, and they're talking about a couple $1 billion investment and giving salvage value credit, salvage value for the property taxes. So that has a big value to it. It's not zero. I know that. So making that stuff more apparent to the legislature and the public, and if you have that information, just as you have a family budget at home that you're working in your head how much money you're spending in X, Y, and Z, you can sort of figure out, how to prepare your budget better for where it's going. So those are definitely a couple of things that we could, do, especially the tax, doing that every year and having the legislature appropriate those. But this all being said, the state is beginning to move in the right direction. The auditor's office recently created an online portal for state spending that details line item spending by agency and program. And this is in response to our, we visited the auditor's office, and many states have sort of an online web portal for their spending. And the Huntington Dispatch actually had an editorial about it too, but they've begun to do this. It's now online, and when all the other agencies have the correct system, they'll be able to put more information online. So I think the state we're starting to move in the right direction of being more transparent so everybody, the public and the legislature especially too, and the media has access to this information, because at the end of the day, it's your money. And I think, if we know how it's being spent and we feel better about it, we're going to have a lot better governance. I think transparency Accountability leads to good governance and good fiscal stability for the state, so we don't have shocks to the system, and we also, can have better programs and be more efficient.
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate that.
I bet it going too long there.
That's great. That's great. Joe's going to tell us a little bit about his agency, Military Affairs and Public Safety, but if you don't know it, you've been to one of his websites. If you've ever been to the regional jail website to see if you knew somebody who got arrested last night, have you ever done that? I'm seeing some heads nod. So he can tell you a little bit about what he does, but also some of the issues that are involved in the dissemination of information for law enforcement.
Thank you. It's absolutely and sadly probably the most popular website in state government for all the wrong reasons. So, I guess you could see here the balance. We have the good guys and the bad guys. So, this is a unique situation for me, and I want to appreciate Dr. Dennison and Bernice Morris and President Kopp and folks for putting this together. It's a unique opportunity to discuss both sides of things. I am all for transparency on the fiscal side of things. I think it's an absolute must because it equals good government. When you get into the realm of what my department does for the state of West Virginia, and you talk of public safety and you talk Homeland Security, there's a lot of information that, quite frankly, I just don't think that the general public should have access to. And I know that's a very brash way to put it, but I mean, when you just boil it down to nuts and bolts of it, for us to effectively do our jobs and create a safe environment for West Virginia and to create a quality of life that you're used to living, collecting information, analyzing information, and then only sharing it when it's critical to your public safety is a must for us to be able to be effective. I think transparency in many ways is a relevant term. It's subjective in many ways. Your definition of transparency may not be mine. That's why I wanted to say that I'm for transparency and total transparency in many ways, but there is a bit of a muddied line, if you will. We face particularly tough challenges creating a more open environment in order to be effective, and with that, some decisions need to be confidential. And I'm not saying it's an effort to freeze out folks and just not tell them what's going on. We spend a lot of money. My agency, for those of you who don't know specifically, and I probably won't hit them all, but it's made up of the National Guard, which is our Homeland Defense mission, the state police, corrections, which is all the prisons, jails, juvenile services, fire marshal, Homeland Security, emergency management. There are about 6,000 employees, and I have a $650 million annual budget. So there's a lot of work going on, and we comply with all open meeting laws. That's not something that's ever in question, but we do a lot of internal meetings in our office trying to figure out operationally in which direction we should go and how we need to adjust to be able to meet our public safety mission. And quite frankly, opening that up to the public and the press creates an environment where usually in the office you hear crickets because nobody wants to speak up and express what their thoughts are, what their concerns are, what direction they feel you should need to go. And it kind of stymies our ability to grow and do the public safety mission that we're required to do. I think that there's a bit of a political culture, if you will, that's cynical about government and its possibilities. I firmly believe that if mistakes are made, folks should be called on them. And that's most of your folks in here, your job on a daily basis and what you'll be doing one day. But government is a great ally as well. You think of the things that they do to protect you on a daily basis, not only in the arena that we work in, but the arena related to public health. And by merely putting the nutritional guidelines and the ingredients in the food you buy, that's a safety mechanism and a way for you to better understand what you're purchasing, what's in the product, will it harm you in any way? If you have an aversion to peanuts, you need to know. So government puts those rules and regulations in place, and that's a protective mechanism for you. So government shouldn't always be looked at as the bad guy that's always trying to do something to stand in your way of you being able to effectively do your job. We can be a significant ally. We are moving toward doing the things that need to be done. not to point fingers on why things aren't done in a better manner, at least in my department, but West Virginia a few years ago moved to a centralized Office of Technology, and it's supposed to better streamline the way we do our technology-based work. It will help our databases eventually talk with one another. It ensures that everybody in state government has the same software and that they marry each other. But what it created for agencies was it rated our technology-based expertise, if you will. So we have to rely on somebody that's not within our daily operations to do the update and the upkeep on a lot of our databases, but we don't have anybody to turn to I'm not computer savvy, I don't have anybody to turn to say, will you put this year's budget on my website? So, and that's a very small step to take, I realize that. But when you consider everything else that's going on a daily basis and my priorities, I honestly choose to try to make sure that the folks of West Virginia are safe over being able to see that I have a $650 million budget and wherever all of it goes. So, I'm more into, I like working off the cuff. I'm much more into answering questions when I can. So I just wanted to kind of give you a brief overview on how I feel we operate within the Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety. We are as open and transparent as we are allowed to be. I think the question that Dr. Kopp said that should resonate with all of you is who makes the decisions on what is protected and what isn't, and that's a very valid question. Sometimes it comes down to folks sitting in a room saying that I think that will create more public discord, if you will, than it will to enhance public safety. And let's better analyze what we have here to look at, and then we'll disseminate it when we think that we have the appropriate mechanism and venue in which to put it forth. So with that, I think I'll shut up and stop going all over the place, but I do appreciate the opportunity to come home. I don't get over this way often enough, and I only live 20 minutes away, so I'll blame that on Dr. Dennison for not inviting me over and walking me around.
We're so glad to have you, and thank you for that. Do you have any questions? Jim?
A question for Professor Herzog. I'm wondering if, in preparation for your visit here, you spent some time online and looked at some West Virginia sites and came to any conclusion about the relative transparency or lack of transparency on the part of West Virginia state government?
I didn't look around too much. I did hop online on a couple of places. I went to the Secretary of State's website, just because the Secretary of State website in many states tends to be a good hub where you can get information about who owns businesses and who's behind corporate names and things like that. And it did seem that the information was there. Also hopped on the county website. In our county, you can get voter registration information online. You can plug in the name of a person if they're registered to vote, find out where they live, what their date of birth is. I couldn't find that information here unless I missed it on the county website. I did notice that the county website does have property tax parcel information online, so which is pretty standard. So I think I did find a few things here, but the voter registration information was not there.
Right. And the county property information will be county by county. It's not necessarily in every county. What other questions?
Is it Joe?
Joe.
I'm sorry.
That's correct, Joe.
You make a pretty good case for keeping some information private, and that's a compliment coming from a long-time journalist. How do you guard against institutional paranoia? Right?
If you're speaking specifically about territorialism and those types of procedures that seem to inhabit state government, and I won't say state government's entirely alone in that, you really don't. You have to build relationships, obviously, and from the top down, and you have to really mandate an open environment, and we can't do anything without, say, the governor's office buy-in. We can't do anything without saying that the legislature understands what mission we're trying to accomplish, especially as it relates to like the Fusion Center situation when we were trying to establish the Fusion Center, because there were a lot of concerns there, and honestly so. Territorialism really is one of the things that really stands in our way of success in just about everything we do. We've done a great job of breaking down some of those barriers, but I think really tearing them all down is going to be something that I won't see. It's just the nature of doing business. Folks are worried more about who gets the credit as opposed to what mission we're accomplishing. And I'm not saying that that's solely in state government. In every job, an arena that I've ever worked in life, that was the mechanism. When you're in class, you should be shooting to be the best student, and you're always worried about what the person beside you is doing and how well they're doing. We have an environment that creates that collective fire to do the best. So those things are very challenging and very difficult to overcome. I will say that since 9/11, and Director Kirk is exactly right, if we were doing today what we were doing then, I'm not saying that we would have never had another major incident on American soil, but I certainly do believe that 9/11 would have never happened. Information sharing and having agencies at the table discussing is at unprecedented heights in West Virginia. There are just still some elements in other agencies that we need to establish better relationships with, and I realize that's a very long and drawn out answer, but it's very challenging. I will not try to sell it short at all. It's one of the biggest challenges we face. You know, we live in a resource-starved environment, and I would rank trying to overcome territorialism right up there with trying to garner the appropriate resources to protect the public.
What other questions?
I wonder if we might just, I guess, boil this down, so I think it's going to maybe paint the picture for both sides to understand this issue. Let's take something like gun permits. The arguments would be made, it's, hey, if it's the government record, it's an open record, people want to know. The other side would say, well, if the criminals know where the guns are, that's a problem. So should we release that information or should we not? All of it.
We were talking about that.
Yes, we were.
We were talking about that in divorces that go in the paper.
I guess I'll start briefly. I think Tom can probably add a lot more to this than I can, being former superintendent of state police and working more closely with that element. Discussing this situation is similar to discussing politics. You have your side, and regardless of, you may make some valid points, but you're not going to make me change my mind on it. I'm one of those people that tends to lean toward protecting a little more of the information when it comes to a situation like this, and I am about just releasing it so everybody knows. But in this situation, that specific situation, I don't see as much harm that I would in other arenas. In my world, when you talk critical infrastructure and vulnerability assessments, those are the things I'm more worried about protecting from the public, because there are too many ill-intentioned folks out there, than I am worried about who has a concealed weapon. So you have to prioritize and pick your battles, and my battles would obviously hedge them more on the sides of Homeland Security than it would be who's carrying a gun and who isn't.
Any other thoughts on gun permits?
I think, I don't know. I think if people want to get guns, they're going to find guns. They're not going to look in the paper. I don't know. I don't really have, not really my issue of expertise, but I think it's okay.
I believe gun permit information should be open to the public, and you know, guns tend to be a hot button issue, right? So it's pro, con, so there tends to be a lot of you know flames that get thrown in these discussions. I'll just back up a little bit. One of my former students got a job at the Commercial Appeal in Memphis as their online data editor guy, and one of the first databases he put up was gun permits. And they were on the website for a while, and then some people started noticing that the gun permit data was up there, and were unhappy about it. And the newspaper was under siege for a while for having the gun permit data up there. But they stuck to it, and you know they did not take the data down. There was a move in the state legislature in Tennessee to shut that information down, to say this is no longer public information, and so we're not going to allow anybody to release it. And there was a pretty good battle that went down till late in the legislative session. And in the end, the state legislature said, we're going to keep this information public because they saw the value of keeping that information out in the public realm. And some of the things that's valuable for is, you might be having somebody come into your house to do something to your house, and you might care whether if that person's an independent contractor, if that person is carrying a gun. If you're hiring somebody to be a babysitter and they're an adult, you might care whether that person might be bringing a gun into your house. So there are legitimate reasons why you might want to know if somebody has a concealed carry permit. And I understand that there are also arguments that if you know I have concealed carry permit, I have guns in my house and you can come steal my guns. But that tends not to happen in these cases. So I would say keep this a public record. In Missouri, where I'm from, it used to be a public record. You could get it on the county level. Then they passed a statewide concealed carry law that said all these are going to be private.
And I think that is a national debate. Many states have allow it and many don't. Tom, did you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I suppose if I were a criminal, I'd want to know who was carrying and who wasn't, because I wouldn't want to go near them. You have to realize in West Virginia, as long as you're above the age and you don't have a criminal background, things like that, you're allowed to carry a firearm unless it's in the restricted area, as long as it's not concealed.
Right.
So if you want to carry one concealed, there's usually a reason for that. Up until Mr. Herzog talked about some of the things that you might want to know if you hire someone, I haven't really thought of a public reason why the public would benefit from knowing that, but I suppose there are some out there.
Very good. Got a question back here.
As a journalism student, there's a big line about privacy, like personal privacy. And when you're talking about gun permits and things like that, you're also talking about what you believe. And, if you have a gun and personal opinion and things like that. So where does privacy and transparency, where is that separated? And who gets to say where it's separated? Anybody?
Well, that is a lot of these issues. We were talking about medical records and that come into play with things like investigating prescription drug issues and things like that. All of those come into play. Anybody have any thoughts on privacy issues that come into play about what information, but for privacy reasons, shouldn't be open to the public, even though it's perhaps gathered by the public?
One of the things that I've seen government agencies do is sometimes you'll ask for information as a journalist or a citizen, and they'll say, oh, that's not public information, that's private. Whether something they say is private is actually besides the point, because the federal government and every state has laws that have specific exemptions and perhaps other laws that should tell you whether something is or is not a public record. So if you ask for something and an agency denies your request for the information, you have a right to say to the agency, show me in the law specifically where you have the power to deny me access to the gun permit records. And then so in Missouri, they could say, okay, they could cite the law that the legislature passed and say, you can't have them because this. And so there are standards and guidelines that they have to follow. But in terms of saying things are private or sensitive, under the law, there's no power for the government to keep that information from you. Just because they believe it's sensitive or private, they have to actually point to the law that gives them the power to withhold that, because the presumption is on public.
Bill.
We have a special gubernatorial election coming up that is expected to draw very low voter turnout. And I wonder, just nationally, how important transparency and access, ease of access, is to kind of re-engaging voters, re-engaging people in the political realm. So probably you two guys, again, might be able to talk more about that.
Indiana's governor. Indiana's governor, Mitch Daniels, is that his name? Yeah, right. Yeah, he spoke in West Virginia, I think, recently, and he's led a really good effort, I think, in Indiana with their transparency website. He's made a very big issue about putting government, fund spending on that side on the website. And he's made it. He talked about it when he was here, I think. So it's definitely.
I think that's important to re-engaging young voters in the process. I think transparency, ease of access is something that can re-engage the voting populace.
No. I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean,
honestly,
I think it can't hurt, because I think it lends to the credibility of government and what the government's trying to accomplish, and anything that you can do that folks feel like they have a vested interest in, including being more transparent, gives folks the feeling and the belief that they're part of this. So I don't see how it can hurt. I think it's something that we've, this governor is obviously committed to being more transparent, and the launching of the website proves that. And we hope that that's just the first step in where we're going with being transparent in West Virginia. We've got a lot of database issues and software issues that we have to overcome, but I don't think that it can hurt at all. I certainly don't.
Ted, this may apply to you probably more particularly than others, because I think this is something your organization pushed for, but following the stimulus package, the federal stimulus package, a lot of states really almost, I was working for Governor Manchin at the time, we almost competed on a level to try to develop the best website that would make this information easily accessible. Looking back a couple of years now, how effective have those efforts been in informing the populace about how the spending has gone with stimulus money, and what could be done differently maybe that has the public used it, and what would you have done to change it, or perhaps make it more accessible?
One thing I would say is I think when they launched the West Virginia Recovery website, it sort of gave us an example of the level of detail that the state could do on their own. So one of the pushes that we had when we met with the auditor's office is like, you're doing that with the stimulus, you just need to come over here and do it for everything else, to developing a website. So I think that had a big role in the creation of this website in a sort of indirect way. So I do think that was a big part of it, because the stimulus the whole point was to be the most transparent use of federal money at that point. And I think it did a lot of good things, in terms of being a really transparent bill, and I think it definitely had some way of leading to doing that here. And I think we did do a good job in West Virginia. I think we got ranked 4th best, I believe, or something in the country on our stimulus website, and we worked with them to do that too. So it wasn't, we helped them do that. But and that's what we are doing with the auditor's office too, is trying to push in that direction. And because I think it is a very valuable tool, and I think that did help lead to that.
Ernest.
I have a question for Tom. Because most people in this room don't know what the Fusion Center does, can you tell us some of those secrets to make us feel comfortable? It won't leave the room.
Shut the door. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you. Actually, it's amazing how transparent we try to be. We have a website. We have our privacy policy on the website. We have the vast amount of information that we deal with comes from open source research. It comes from what's already public. What we try to do is we try to put it together to develop trends and try to find out what's going on in West Virginia, or what's coming into West Virginia that we might not want to come into West Virginia, gangs, drugs, things like that. But
give some examples of those things that you're working on that would enlighten us.
Yes, sir, absolutely. We have a couple initiatives going actually with a couple of the colleges and universities, where one good example is we had when we had the mine disaster, and the president came in for that. As part of the checkoff list that the Secret Service does, is they contact the Fusion Center, and they let us know that the president's coming in, basically the schedule. Now, obviously, we can't broadcast that to anyone. But at the same time, one of the reasons why they gave that to us was so that we could use our analyst to see if there was anything going on in that area or the surrounding area that would be adverse to the president's visit. We, in turn, contacted some of our private partners down in that area, and we also contacted some of the colleges and universities that are working with us that do very well on open source research. And as a result of that, we actually came up with 2 direct threats that were being made, one to the president and one to the president's wife, that Secret Service didn't have and would not have had if it hadn't been for contacting the Fusion Center, and the Fusion Center being able to turn around and ask for assistance through other organizations. And that's what we do. We bring different organizations into the center, and everybody brings in their own expertise and their own skill sets and their own power that's vested into them by the people and by the legislature. And we use that, we're kind of the hub for everyone to bring that in. Another good, I think a good example is I give a lot of talks to educators. And it seems to me when I go and I talk about terrorism, people are interested in that, but they're more interested in the day-to-day quality of life and what will affect that. In most places in this state, it's drugs and gangs. So what I started doing was I started using some of the time that they gave me to talk about gangs and how the Fusion Center uses information to tell about migration into the state. One of the ways we do that is we have a couple of experts within the Fusion Center and some outside of the Fusion Center that read gang graffiti. And anyone that knows anything about gang graffiti, you can drive into a neighborhood that you're not familiar with, and if there's a lot of graffiti, it's like a newspaper. You can tell what gangs are in the area, what illegal activities they're into, their dominance over other gangs. There's a lot that you can determine by that. So I try to show examples of that, and almost immediately I began to get electronically school teachers that, first of all, whenever I give a presentation like that, I always have a number of educators come up to me and say, I drive past that thing every day. And I always thought it was just vandalism. I didn't know what that was. So almost immediately, we began to get in pictures that teachers would use their cell phone and take pictures of graffiti that they would see, send it into us, say, okay, what does this mean? Now, what we're able to do with that is we're able to compare that with the data banks that we have and the experts that we have and tell what's going on in that area. We can then turn around and tell police agencies, don't know if you know it or not, but there's a new gang in town. Here's the information that we have on the gang in general, and here's the information we have on the gang from other fusion centers in your area, right across into maybe Maryland or Pennsylvania, so that administratively they can increase patrols in that area, maybe tell their undercover units about that, about maybe a certain drug that gang's associated with. So there's just a lot of information that ends up turning into intelligence by that. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, but I mean, it's very, what we do is very open. But at times there's information that we receive in, especially if it involves an ongoing investigation or an ongoing trend, that at that particular point, it obviously would not be conducive to release that information, or it would jeopardize the investigation.
Very good. Any other questions? One of the other things I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about is if there were a major event, and that's part of what Homeland Security is about, what plans do you have in place, or what would be the guidelines for what information would be disseminated to the public?
We have, that's a question you asked me at lunch. I didn't get a chance to answer that. We have what we call distribution list within the Fusion Center. And depending on which group we want to talk to, they will be associated with that distribution list. We have a list for law enforcement officials only that includes law enforcement sensitive information. We have over 2,000 law enforcement officials within West Virginia and outside of the state that are part of that. We also have a distribution list for educators. We have another distribution list for our private partners who are not law enforcement. So what would happen is, and actually we've beefed that up a little bit after the recent earthquake that we had, because that's information that we almost instantly began to receive information from the National Operations Center through the FEMA Operations Center, letting us know, letting all the fusion centers know, this is not an attack, this is not a bomb that went off, this is not all those other things. What this was, and they told us exactly what it was, where it happened at, and a contact person there. So we received that information literally within 3 to 4 minutes from the time that it happened. That is information that everybody needs to know.
Right.
Because no one knew, everyone had the same questions at that point, no one really knew. So we're developing a scheme whereby we can not only let those distribution points know, those lists that we have, but also that we can mass broadcast to the media information that we get in. That is general knowledge, because that is one of the things. We're not just a terrorism center like fusion centers began. We're an all hazards, all crime, and all threat fusion center, meaning any information that we receive in, we take. We don't throw anything away, and we don't discard anything. So that if it's information on an earthquake, we will have a means by which we can let as many people know as we can that also can mass broadcast that information, the newspapers, the radio stations, TV stations, things like that.
Was that in place with this recent earthquake?
Part of that was in place, but since then, the Secretary has called everybody in within a couple of days after that happened and said, okay, we've had an actual event here. Let's not talk about the drills that we've had. We've had an actual event. What can we do better? So we did have something in place, but it was nowhere near what we're getting in place at this point.
Teachable moment.
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah, because it did take a little while for the information. I know somebody at my building thought at first it was just our building that was rattling, there was something wrong, and of course they came to the publisher and said, you got to fix the building, it's shaking. And then someone came in and says, no, it's bigger than that. Somebody felt it in Barbersville. So that's when, once we knew it had gone all the way from Huntington to Barbersville, we knew it was a big event. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Just trying to get some discussion going where you guys might disagree with each other. Mr. Kirk, you just said that in West Virginia there was a direct suspicion that somebody might be trying to do something to the president when he was here. When should the public have access to that information? 3 years later, 4 years later, or 3 weeks later, or 3 days later, or 3 minutes later?
Okay, and I'm assuming you're asking partly my personal opinion and partly operationally. Operationally, we give it to something like that. We give the Secret Service, and then we are no longer an owner of that information. They do with it what they want to. It's cleared out of our. We don't have anything in our data banks or anything at that point because that's what we do. We disseminate information.
But
so
you had it.
Yes, we did, and we analyzed it. What we got in, we vetted it, we analyzed it, and then we turned it over to the Secret Service.
Should the public have any knowledge that in West Virginia there was something against the president?
Well, I think generally known, there's always something against the president, no matter which president it is at which time in history. There's always someone out there that wants to do harm to the president.
I assume a specific thing.
Get your tap shoes on.
I think if that would have been a credible threat with some type of action resulting from that, that would have been worthy enough for the public to know about. Because it was properly vetted by us and passed on to the Secret Service, and they investigated it and found out that the threat was not a credible threat. It was more of a online chatter than what it was a credible threat. Then at that point, I think they looked at it as there was really no benefit to the public for that. But we leave that up to them at that point, because they are now the owners of that information.
Professor Erdogan, would you agree or disagree with that? When should the public know?
I mean, I think this assuming the information is public and publishable, it's not something that's an active law enforcement investigation that would be exempted under your state law. I mean, this becomes an issue, an editorial discretion issue. It's kind of like if there's a bomb threat at the high school. Do you publish every single bomb threat that occurs at your high school? I worked for newspapers that did not publish the bomb threats for the high school because they happened somewhat regularly, and there was also the thought that the more you publish bomb threats at the high school, there's this feedback loop that you send out to people that, okay, kids calling bomb threats to your high school that were not. But if it was a credible bomb threat, if it's something that turned to be a pattern, I would think that the media would want to get involved. If you look at what happened on the anniversary of September 11th, there were threats that were reported on. So I mean, this is something that the media does know and does report on. And I think the president is an important person, the most public figure in America. So I think it's fair game to report on those things. But I think you also, as an editor, have to judge. Is this a credible threat? Is this just some crazy person who's posting a comment, or having some kind of chat with somebody and blowing off steam? What's a real threat and what's just?
I think in many instances, and this is kind of hijacking the conversation in a little bit of a different direction, but we get our information from the public, so it's already public knowledge. We take a situation, something's not coming to me right off the bat, but he talks about information coming in. A couple of years ago, the G20 summit in Pittsburgh, there was a submarine located in a lake in West Virginia. And if I mess it up, Tom, you tell me where I went wrong, but it certainly struck people's attention, but it's not something that a law enforcement agency was patrolling the lake and noticed. It was something that somebody was out there and they saw this and they're like, what in the world is that and why is that there? And they snapped a picture of it, gave it to their local law enforcement, I think, and it ended up in the hands of the Fusion Center to try to vet. But the concern was that maybe somebody was testing this new type of miniature submarine to be able to take it up the river and get to Pittsburgh and do some damage during the G20 summit. And it ended up really being something fairly innocuous in that it was a new type's locally made submarine company, and they were just out there in the waters testing their capabilities of this little one-man submarine. But it raised a lot of eyebrows, it got a lot of attention, the information came from the public, we took it, we vetted it. Now, did it go out to the public as, you have this concern? But it certainly wasn't information that was kept. We shared it, we vetted it, we put it out, but it wasn't something reportable or considered reportable.
But a lot of the information that we cover,
see something
reportable information, is it? And again, property values and everything else. I mean, it's important information for maybe the neighbor to know what their neighbor's house is valued at. But is it really out there for the public? And surely you didn't put that information on a website that there was that word wasn't the sub.
Well, I mean, there was no need for it. I mean, sometimes it was like the threat to the president. There wasn't ultimately a threat to the president, but it wasn't our information to share at that point.
But would it come across as Big Brother's watching? If you put that out that somebody was testing us, then you really would have the idea, my God, what are they doing?
And in many ways, we were talking about the license plate readers at lunch, and it's a valuable police officer public safety tool. There are a lot of folks that see it as another invasion of privacy. To oversimplify it, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Those license plate readers read, was it 1,200 license plates in a minute? Is that what, and they only flag if there's something seriously You know, they're not worried about whether you're double parked, whether the sticker on your car is valid. So, you know, Big Brother's out there, and unfortunately we have the name of Big Brother, and in many ways it's partially true. We want to be Big Brother. We want to be protective. That's part of what we're supposed to do. But we want to do it in the proper manner. And that's not invading privacy, and that's being as publicly transparent as we can while still continuing to be able to protect the infrastructure in the state and the citizens' well-being.
We just have time for a couple more questions. Bill, do you have one?
You know, I'm a journalist, a lot of journalism students in here, so we're trained to look for this information. How do we help the public know where to look and decipher what they're looking at for themselves? And you kind of mentioned you haven't really thrown the education aspect out yet, but how do we do that to where, you know, John Smith can log on and really look at this and how to find it, you know, instead of, I want them to read our paper, don't get me wrong, but how do they learn? I mean, what's the best way to educate the public on how to find this information and decipher for themselves?
That's a really good question. I think that's an ongoing challenge that we have as journalists in being transparent about our own methods and giving people the power to look up information themselves. So, you know, some examples, I mean, you know, might be to, you know, if you have a newspaper website or a TV station website, post the original source documents if you're writing a story about something that's supported by documents. You know, if you get copies of, you know, something at the Recorder of Deeds office, scan them to a PDF and post them online. If you did a story that you, in which you made a public records request and got information for the story, just put that in your story and tell people that you got that information. Have your editor write a column online or in the paper saying, we support access to information. It's important for us. You know, it's important for you too, and you know, show examples of why this is. You know, as journalists, we're storytellers, right? You know, we tell stories that help people make sense out of the world. So if you can give examples and tell stories about why releasing information is important, you know, that really can bring it home. You know, if it's somebody who gets a database of doctors who've been disciplined in your state, so they can make a better educated choice about which doctor they're going to. You know, that's a good example. I know some state sunshine coalitions give out like FOI heroes, in what the ordinary citizens who've gone on to do great things using the local sunshine law to get information about something going on in their own neighborhood. So I think those are really great ways of getting the word out about why this is so important. And this gets back to a question you had earlier about people feeling disengaged. And a really huge problem in our democracy right now is we have this separation in our heads of us against them. Well, it's really not that. It's not us against them. It's not us and them. The government is an extension of the people. The government exists because we, the people, decided that the government should exist in its current form. So this is all of us together. It's not us separate.
Any other questions?
How well is the sharing of information gone? In the past, I don't think a lot of these agencies had any reason to share it with anybody else. This is what they were working on. This is what they were doing. Where was the information going to go outside of that? So to open it up, how's it gone and how freely has the information been? I mean, there's a difference between telling you something and telling you everything. I mean, even within the parts that are not open to the public, how open are agencies with one another about what they're doing?
I think it, to be quite honest, I think it's really all over the spectrum. In times of disaster, and West Virginia is obviously no stranger to their share of disasters, mining, flooding, agencies usually tend to come together well and play well together. But when we're trying to plan for these incidences and learn from these incidents, you see a little bit of that, well, this is my arena and this is my world, and when I'm ready to play, I'll play. And I mean, we get the job done, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, there's a lot of room for improvement on how well agencies play together. You know, I'll go back to something that Governor Manchin did right after Hurricane Katrina. He saw the need that folks didn't have a place to go, and he wanted to bring some to West Virginia. And that was a Memorial Day weekend, Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day. It was actually Labor Day weekend. It was a Friday afternoon, 4:30, when the call came in, and he basically said, you know, I want to do this and I want to do this right away. Well, then the scramble goes on, you know, and you've got to have a lot of agencies outside of the Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety to pull this off. You've got to have the private sector, you've got to have Red Cross, you've got to have a lot of your volunteer organizations, Volunteer West Virginia, you've got to have the Department of Health and Human Resources, you've got to have the Department of Transportation. So there were a lot of elements that you needed in place to be able to put this plan together and pull this off. And 4:30, Labor Day weekend, every phone call that went out, everybody that answered said, yes, I'll be there right away. Everybody canceled their plans. Everybody got around the table. We spent 24 hours straight putting a plan together. Not one person around the table said, I can't do that, I shouldn't do that, or I won't do that. So there's a great history of West Virginia stepping up and doing what's needed when they need to. It's the other area that we really need to do a lot of work in, and that's preparing and planning before situations happen and making folks realize that their arena is our arena and vice versa. You know, we want everybody to be part of you know, it's not who gets the credit, it's what the outcome will be.
Is that a public meeting?
No. But we didn't stop. I mean, we had the Red Cross in there. We had many elements in there, but it wasn't something where I called the secretary at the time called the newspaper and said, hey, you know, we're going to be doing this. You want to come over and catch us getting shots of us putting this together? Or, you know, it caused for a bunch of people to get together and make some decisions and do some things, and that's what happened. We wouldn't have probably restricted certain people, but you know, to pull this off, you can't have a room full of folks just sitting back watching what you do. It tends to hinder the process, and we didn't have a lot of time to pull it together. So, and you know, there wasn't a true big decision-making policy body, if you will, either. Which in this situation probably wouldn't have mattered because we were trying to do the right thing.
All right, very good. One more question.
Question for the Missouri site. What are you doing for your hard launch? Who are you targeting? And you expect to sustain this through selling the services? Is that your end goal? Because obviously you must have these grants or something you set it up to begin with.
Okay. I didn't hear the first. I heard everything else but the first sentence.
What are you going to do for your hard launch?
For the hard launch, it's basically the site as it is now with the Sunshine Letter Generator and also the ability to share data that you've obtained from a state or local agency. And for that, we're going to be announcing, we're going to be pushing it out to people who are already following us, our email list, and also reaching out to journalists around the state to try and all journalists and also organizations in the state that have an interest in open information.
So all digital feeds follow up to get the
Yes.
message out there.
Primarily a digital follow-up. We're also going to be, the Missouri Sunshine Coalition is also planning some road shows around the state. It's like the West Virginia one, it's a fairly new organization. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to also mention it as one of the resources when we do the road shows for citizens around the state. In terms of funding, that's going to be the big question. Right now, I have $0 in funding, and I am pretty much carrying the duties of finishing the building of the site, and also having my graduate students do work on it too. But it would be great to get additional funding and to do some other things with it. So, but it's hoping also that people in other states can use it as a model for their own states.
I hope y'all will all join me in thanking our panelists. As you can see, we just kind of scratched the surface, but it was a great thing to do, and thank you, Furnace, for putting it together, and Corey for helping to sponsor this. It was certainly an enjoyable thing for me to do, so thank you all so much.